Okay, we're about to begin. If everyone would like to take their seats. Good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to offer a special thank you to Côte Saint-Luc resident and library member Sean Park for her musical contribution to this evening's program on the library's baby grand piano. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank our partners HarperCollins Canada, Lauren in particular, and Librairie, Paragraphe, Bookstore, as well as our sponsors. You'll see Julia over there from Paragraphe Bookstore, who will be selling copies of the book afterwards, and Emma will be available to sign them. We would also like to thank Edgewood Florist, who donated flowers, Train Man, who had a special display upstairs related to the book and trains, of course, and Pâtisserie Lavande, a Côte Saint-Luc bakery, who donated 150 mini cupcakes with the book, so cute, in vanilla and in chocolate. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to pass the microphone along to our mayor, who will also speak about this evening's event, Mitchell Brownstein.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thank you all. So first of all, it's a great honor to be here with Tara Schwartz. I know Tara very well from interviewing me over the years on CTV. She was for 2 decades a reporter and senior news anchor for CTV television. She's interviewed hundreds of people, including me, hosted multiple events and moderated panels of all kinds. Tara has won 4 Canadian Journalism Awards. She has been named a Woman of Influence by Namat Canada. She is currently the Vice President of Communications and Marketing at the MUHC Foundation, where she works to advocate to equality and excellence in healthcare through philanthropy. Tara is also a published author. Her first book, a memoir on her path to motherhood, was published in April 2022 and is called Can't Help Falling, a Long Road to Motherhood. Now, before I introduce Emma Donoghue, I want to just give my own personal feeling about the beauty of books and writing and what we do in Côte Saint-Luc. Many of you know that I'm usually on this stage acting when we're in this room. And we put on many shows, whether it's The Wizard of Oz when I was the wizard, or most recently, we put on My Fair Zadie when I was the oldest man that ever lived, which was a lot of fun. And we also, it was about many of you who came to the show, maybe heard this already, Ari Sterling was one of our members of the Côte Saint-Luc Dramatic Society who had an idea about 14 years ago. Let's get the seniors involved on the stage by taking shows that we've done like Grease and rewriting them as parodies. So we did many, and that was My Fair Zadie was My Fair Lady. But one of the shows that I was in as well was Grease, originally with Ari, who played Beauty School Dropout. And years later, when she started writing these genius parodies, I was invited back to play, well, not the teen angel anymore, but the angel for a bridge club dropout. And just to think of the words and how people write ideas, well, this is something that I do to make myself feel good when I listen to it. And I'm going to play it for you now because this was me just a few weeks ago on this stage. Well, not when I introduced exactly as I'm doing now. Your story's sad to tell, a senior ne'er-do-well, most mixed up, trickless player in the flock. Your strategy's abysmal. Here, take this Pepto-Bismol. Sit down, I think it's time we had a talk. So if you listen to the words here of this parody written by Ari Sterling, it's brilliant. And we embraced it, an idea from a Côte Saint-Luc resident who went to Bialik and continues with us today. Now she's an agent in Toronto. Musical dropout, senior club dropout. You know this game is not for you, bridge club dropout. Kiss all those tournaments at you. Well, at least you have some cooking skills. Just stick to your Canada. 'cause you wouldn't win a game unless you played it with a dreidel. Baby, don't sweat it. You're far too dumb to be a dummy. Better forget it. Don't even think of playing rummy. Now your odds are dust. Your bets are bust. You've never learned the lingo. Wipe off that poker face and go back to playing bingo. So that's the fun that we do in this room, and it just relaxes me before I go up to the next thing that I'm doing, which is a public council meeting, which may be a little more exciting. So before I do that, we're going to introduce Emma Donoghue. Emma's a celebrated Irish-Canadian novelist, screenwriter, and playwright whose storytelling has captivated audiences around the world. Her breakthrough novel, Room, became an international sensation, selling nearly 3 million copies, winning the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize and the Commonwealth Writers Prize, and earning shortlist spots for both the Man Booker and Orange Prizes. Emma also wrote the screenplay for the film adaptation, which received 4 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture. Her literary range is both bold and boundless, from the historical domestic psychodrama of The Wonder, which was shortlisted for the Giller Prize and later adapted into a critically acclaimed Netflix film, to the gripping pandemic-era novel, The Pull of the Stars, nominated for both the Trillium Book Award and the Giller Prize. She continues to break new ground. Her latest book, The Paris Express, was inspired by the 1895 Montparnasse train disaster that was famously captured in a series of surreal, extraordinary photographs. The story takes place during the course of one day on the ill-fated express train en route from Normandy to Paris, and is packed with a fascinating cast of characters. A riveting mix of French, fin de siècle, social commentary and mystery, Donoghue is able to deliver an historical thriller with emotional depth and razor-sharp insight. And hot off the press, it was just announced that the novel has been longlisted for the 2025 Giller Prize. Please give a warm welcome to Tara Schwartz and Emma Donoghue.
Tara, please use your microphone.
Green M&Ms, I could say, could you have them? There we go. Cupcakes made with my book cover on.
I don't think you will ever, again, maybe be introduced by a singing mayor. I think this was like the one and only today. That is amazing. I'm a fan, first of all, I want to say that. I'm an absolute fan.
Thank you so much.
So I'm very excited about today's interview. Just because I like to always know before we get started, how many here have read the book? Just because hey, well, that's going to change everything. Okay,
It's not everybody though.
no, it's not everybody's, but it's good to know that there's like a group of people in the audience that have read it. So, okay, so as you all know, for those of you who have been here before, we usually do about 45 minutes where I get to ask Emma questions. She's going to do a reading from her book after that, and then we'll get to audience questions for about 15, 20 minutes. Okay? All right. So I'm going to jump in with my questions, and I want to start with, I want to know if you always loved to write, because for some reason I have this image in my head of you like stealing away from chores when you were a little girl and finding a quiet place to write. Was that something that you always loved to do?
To be fair, I think I would have stolen away from shores anyway. It's out of sheer laziness, being the youngest of 8 children. there was always someone more competent to do the chores, I felt. And so away I would sidle, mostly to read. But yes, I did start writing at 7, and it just found it the most amazing trip. Just that out of my head experience to make something new out of words that had been never put together in that particular combination before. You know, whether they were good or not, didn't matter, they were new. It's often been said that you need a hard childhood to be a good writer. You know, you need something to fight against, to be chest about. But I think there's a lot to be said for having indulgent parents who, when you go in and wake them up on a weekend morning with your brand new poem, they don't, you know, chase you away. But my mother used to struggle up in bed and say, read it to me. And then she'd ask for a copy. So yes, I was extremely encouraged.
Lovely. And you write so many different kinds of things. You write novels, you write plays, you write screenplays, you write scripts for movies. Does each one of these things bring you something different as a writer?
It does, and not just in terms of the actual work on the page, but in terms of the working process. For instance, you might say that a play and a screenplay, a novel, have a lot in common, certainly at the level of dialogue. But with a novel, I'm creating that dialogue entirely alone in, you know, you could say in my own little sort of kingdom. So I have all the power, but equally, I'm just alone all day, making it all up myself and having to, you know, find sources of energy and ideas for myself. If I'm writing that play, if I'm writing it as a play, then the first time I sit down with actors and a director, I suddenly get their infusion of energy and ideas, so it's much more interactive. And even more so in the film world, because I would say I'd have the least power if it's a film I'm writing, because directors or producers will take your draft and then perhaps hire other writers, or, you know, give you intensive notes. So you've the least power, but equally you have the glam factor of your friends saying, "What's Darren's pew like?" So each of these forms is very pleasurable in different ways, and they're a good contrast with each other. You know, to be involved in, say, film development and how sort of sociable lunches and so on, that's a lovely break from the kind of quiet, isolated work of working on the next novel.
Very fortunate, I guess, that you get to do all of that.
And it also spreads your risks, to be honest, because you can't really know what's going to make you a living. So I've always just written many things and not worried too much about the fate of any one of these works, figuring, you know, they'll find readers or audiences and to different degrees, but it'll all add up to a literary career.
Which sort of brings me to my next question, because you mentioned in part of your biography that you're fortunate enough to have been able to make a living as an author since the age of 23. You even go so far as to say you've never held down sort of a quote honest job. So I would love to hear a little bit about the story, like what brought you from Ireland to Canada? Why did you choose to stay with me? Why did you leave? Just a little bit of your history, because I think it's so fascinating.
Basically, I fell madly in love with a Canadian. And this is why I've
Not to get back to
writing that. Oh, you know, Canada doesn't have a very high population, so the government basically funds Canadians to go abroad. You know, my partner was on a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship funded by Canadian government money. And so I got hooked and reeled in. And so I've been in London, Ontario with her ever since. Yes, it was about love. But, you know, I may have come for love of one Canadian, but I have stayed for love of Canada. I've been very happy here. It's been a very easy transition, you know, for an Irish person to come to Canada. It's not a huge cultural gulf to bridge. And yet it's enough to make it interesting. I think writers should always emigrate. I think it's very good for you to be slightly out of your usual situation and to be realizing that your norms are just slightly different from the ones prevailing here or your vocabulary. So yeah, I've been extremely happy in Canada, and I found that the Canadian literary scene embraced me very quickly too. You know, I pretty much just landed and they were putting Canadian authors stickers on their books. So I found that very gratifying as well, that Canadian literature is such a diverse and multicultural literature, you know, and whereas Irish literature still has a much more, you know, culturally unified aspect to it.
Let's dive into the Paris Express.
Choo choo!
There we go. We've got sound effects and everything. So for those of you who haven't read the book, with the very first words, you get on the train. and you don't get off the train until the book is finished. And I want to know from you, what was it like to set an entire book in this one contained location?
I love limits. They are sometimes limits of time. You know, I've written novels that are set over, say, 1 week or 3 days, and novels that are set in one head, in the consciousness of one person. You know, in the case of Room, it was literally a locked room. But sometimes it's psychological, such as a psychological prison. In my novel, The Wonder, a little girl has chosen to sort of withdraw from the world and was trying to live without food. So she's kind of self-imprisonment there. Or I've got a novel about an island off the coast of Ireland called Haven, where 3 monks go to live, specifically because it is difficult there. Yeah, I just like having perhaps arbitrary limits set for my characters and then seeing how they struggle within them. So in this case, as soon as it's a particular photograph that I spotted, and that commemorated this train disaster, and I thought that's my next novel, because it was such an incongruous image of a technological glory, which is a 19th century steam train, but in a position of total abysmal failure. So it captured something about the ups and downs of technology and the kind of potential absurdity about having you know, a schedule and a protocol that can all go completely wrong. Yeah, I began with the photograph, and I almost immediately knew that I would set the novel just over the length of the train journey, and that physically I would keep it confined to the train. However, within that, I have, I think, 35 named characters. So in a way, it's a novel of great fullness in terms of characters, but then tightness in terms of location and time.
It's funny because she keeps leading him into the exact next question I was going to ask her, because I was going to talk to you about characters. I feel you're setting me up for every question.
Kind of a well-structured interview.
So
You've done this before.
there are an enormous number of characters in the book, which makes it such a fascinating read. So I have a few questions about characters. The first one is, how do you flesh out each person so well when there are so many characters to flesh out?
In a way, I had an sort of extensive auditioning process in that this train journey, and my source was about 40 articles in the French press about it. And they recorded the names of some of the VIPs on the train. There happened to be 3 members of parliament on the train that day going back to Paris. And I think that's one reason the disaster happened, because of the pressures of VIPs. But apart from the names of a few famous people, the journalists did not record who else was on the train. And so I thought, well, I'm going to have to make up these people. But I was interested in what kind of people were around in 1890s Paris. And I was so dazzled by what I found, that the city was the heart of politics and industry and invention, but also bohemian life, political radicals, you know, anarchists, queers, and people from all over the French Empire would go there, Americans, painters, students. So it was this magnet city. And I was so fascinated by the real people I was reading about. I thought, well, I'm going to set a rule for myself that all my characters in the novel are people who could have been on that train. We don't know if they were or not, but they were around, so they could have been. So then I was spoiled for choice. So I began with even more people than are in there now. But then after the first draft, I sort of rigorously culled any of them who were just having a bit of a dull day in my book. I would just, like, for instance, the town of Granville, where the novel begins, where the train journey began. It's now known as where Christian Dior grew up. So I had his father, Mr. Dior, who ran a fertilizer factory, cunningly getting money from the town, but taking away the contents of its sewers and then processing it and selling it back to the farmers as fertilizer. So I had him as a character, but even though his backstory was interesting, he wasn't having an interesting enough time on my pages. So he got culled. But I had enormous pleasure in the task of choosing people. And often it was not the most famous people. Sometimes a novel is so psychological compared with a play or a film. Sometimes what's really interesting is what's going on just in somebody's head. So, for instance, there's a painter on the train. He's not the most famous of the painters who went to northern France, but he was really interesting to me because he was African American. And so he would have found France such a liberation because it was rather less racist than where he was coming from. So there he is on the train thinking, am I allowed to be here on the train in this class? You know, if this was Baltimore, I'd be kicked out by the guards. So, you know, he's having all this imposter syndrome and tension. And at one point he has a sort of a panic nosebleed, but it's all going on kind of behind the eyes. So I love the idea of inhabiting the kind of secret consciousness of each of these different people.
I love hearing about how you chose your characters. So now tell us, how do you make people care about them? Because there are, again, like, it's so interesting to hear about the process of how you created each one, curated each one, but now how do you make us love them or hate them or feel badly for them?
I suppose you have to give each of them high stakes. It doesn't have to be, you know, that a business empire will follow. It can be something like, you know, I've got one little sort of, you know, subplot in a carriage where a medical student starts to spot that somebody might be ill. So that's just a little sort of private drama between those people, but you get a very strong tension built up as soon as the medical student starts saying, like, I think your daughter might not be well. So you have to give each of them something that matters a lot to them, even if that's just at the sort of micro level of, you know, I fancy that girl, or you know, what's going on with that passenger there? So a curiosity or an anxiety, even something very, it might seem low stakes, like there's a 7-year-old boy on the train and he's determined to not miss his stop, you know, so it's a very micro plot line. When he, you know, falls asleep and misses his stop, that to him is the biggest deal in the world. So yeah, it's very interesting that the ones who turned out to be my point of view characters, there are about 14 of them, I think. Again, they're not the most famous or even sort of big noticeable characters in it, but they're all people who I thought it would be interesting to hear their private thoughts.
I think that is what makes them interesting, how you go inside each of their heads. Now, a very critical theme in this novel is time. We are very aware of it. It's the way the chapters are broken down. It's the race to be on time. We're constantly aware of it right throughout the entire book. One character even says at time, you know, he says just a little bit more time. So how and why were you playing with this idea of time in that way in your book?
Well, what drew me to the story in the first place was that it was a train accident. I thought it's not at all clear why it happened, but it was clearly something to do with the need to make up about 7 minutes. And the train fell behind by 7 minutes, which in the 1980s Ireland, my childhood, is no big deal. Our buses were regularly turning up half an hour late and nobody got sacked over it. But clearly in 1895 Paris, the train system was committed to punctuality. So one interesting thing I found in my research was that the train crew got a massive bonus, 40% of their year's pay, if they could consistently be punctual and not use up too much coal or even stopping for water could be an expense. So they were under huge pressure to basically do their job incredibly well and therefore earn a lot more. And so when they fell behind by 7 minutes because of one entitled passenger, that was a disaster. And they were basically put under implicit pressure from the company to make up those 7 minutes. So I knew it had to be a story about time, and then time came into it in all sorts of ways. And the character I connected with most actually was the senior guard. There are two sort of conductors or guards on the train, and the young one is black, bit of a playboy, and the senior one is a worrywart. And I related to him because I realized quite early on in my research that there are no connecting corridors between the carriages in 1895. There are no bathrooms, there's no dining car, there's nowhere for them to go. So they're really stuck in the carriage until they get to a stop. And then they all sort of, leap off and try and buy a sandwich or find a toilet. So I felt I was very much like the senior guard who's desperately trying to herd all these cats and get everybody back on the train after about 4 minutes at each of the stops. So I was often quite, tense about the timing of it all. I still want to explore her consciousness, but we've run out of time.
You're getting caught up in your own problem. The train's destination is Paris, so there's French characters, and there's a lot of Frenchism and Quebecoisms, which as a Quebecer I found very entertaining, a very entertaining part of the book. Did you have fun playing with language in that way?
I did, and actually I really enjoyed choosing a little epigraph for the head of each chapter, because trains and books have been connected with each other from the beginning, because as soon as you're on a train, you don't have to be, steering the car or, commanding the horses, so you can afford to read books. So from the start, trains have been great promoters of book sales, and other people have been stingy about the kind of trashy escapist fiction that people bought to read on trains. So I think, and trains have often been seen as a good sort of analogy as well for the way a book will sort of take you. So from the start, I wanted a kind of a network of intertextuality by having people, read things, and by having little bits at the top of each chapter. So I really enjoyed reading those. And yes, linguistically, it was a bit of a challenge writing a novel in which English stands in for French, as it were. And if you're doing that, then often you don't want to, I have them call each other monsieur rather than sir, but you don't want to stick in lots of French phrases, because obviously that would make people realize, oh, the rest of it's not French. So sometimes you have to just sort of commit to the protocol that, my English words here represent words that would have been French. But yes, I've written novels set in France or among French people a couple of times. I'm sort of Francophiliac, I would say, in that my partner's French, and we've been to live in France quite a few times, including the year I wrote this novel. We were living in Paris, in Montparnasse. That's how I came to hear about this disaster in the first place. So without ever becoming a fluent French speaker, I've been sort of on the verges of Francophone cultures at many points in my life, and always a keen fan of French pastries, for instance. And during the novel, during the year I was in Paris, every pastry is relevant,
It's research. It's research. Class is also something that figures very deeply in the book. First class, second class, third class, what that means to the characters. So explore that a little bit for us. You as a writer, what you discovered there.
Well, I've been interested in writing about a disaster because, to have a group of strangers randomly brought together and then all put through the same kind of crisis is a lovely narrative device, not to sound too enthusiastic about it. From a writer's point of view, it's great when things start to go horribly wrong. And if it's a train, you know that it's going to involve a wide sweep of society. It's not, like a private jet, but that those people are going to be highly segregated because, even more than on, say, air travel today, trains, a first class carriage was unrecognizable to those in third class. They were paying 3 times as much, but they got, padded, opulent furniture and foot warmers full of boiling water and little blinds and little lamps and so on, and the guards stuffing up to them. And second class was a bit bare bones, but at least it was relatively empty. So I have one character deliberately go into second class, even though she has a first class ticket, but she's desperate to get a bit of writing done. I could relate to that. And then in third class, you were on backless benches, so with your shoulder blades pressed in queasy intimacy against the shoulder blades of strangers, and people had their skips of food or breastfeeding their babies. It was all very crowded and intimate and aromatic in third class. But equally, there are paintings that show it looking quite jolly with people pulling out musical instruments. So yeah, in a way, a train is a perfect sort of image of a segregated society, which sort of naturally brought up the idea of social inequalities and how this, very self-consciously modern, speedy, efficient, impressive society was, of course, full of suffering too.
You chose a very fascinating woman as your heroine / villain, was sort of how I came to see Mado. And I just want you to tell our audience a little bit about her, because she's so unique and it's so interesting to have this kind of heroine / villain and who she was. She's sort of unexpected.
Yeah, my source for the novel was 40 articles about the crash. And when the journalists asked several locals in Paris, what did you think when you heard this terrible sound? Several of them independently said, oh, we assumed it was an anarchist bomb. And I, reading this, was like, they assumed this in 1895? But yes, it was already routine. The president of France had been stabbed to death the previous year. And, this kind of random attack was quite common. And in particular, the ideology that people feared would inspire these crimes was anarchism. And I thought, well, actually, that could be a very interesting storyline for me, because the thing about anarchism is that somebody could be about to commit some terrible, terrible mass murder, but actually their intention has this little heart of gold, you know, what they, you know, it's a burning social protest. They're saying like, this society is so corrupt, we need to destroy it and start all over again. And it sounds impractical and naive. And so I thought, instead of going for the usual anarchist character who's kind of a brooding Eastern European man in his 40s, you know, very gaunt and skulking, if I go for a highly young, idealistic person, then we will be sympathetic towards this person and dreading what they're about to do at the same time. And you know, mixed feelings are very good for fiction. I never want 100% villain or 100% heroine.
Yeah, and you succeeded with her, and I think the way you said it, I felt sympathy for her, but at the same time, I was like, no, don't do it. I love the fact that it's historical, and it makes the book so unique. And I'm sure the people who read the novel agree. I was so happy at the end of the book to be able to read about that the train existed and that this ride existed, and to learn more about it. Like, I thought it was critical that we were able to learn that as a reader.
You know, I'm glad you say that, Tora, because I think with my first historical novel, I had an author's note at the back, but I was a bit sheepish about it. And I thought like, oh, you know, it might be a bit uncool to spell out all the ways in which, you know, which bits are factual and which bits are fictional. Maybe I should really sort of hide that away. And my publisher at the time said, you're kidding, people who really want this stuff. So when I did a collection of historical short stories, she got me to put the author's note after each story. So as you went along, you'd be, you know, dealing with the question, what was real and what was invented. And I have now become known for extremely long author's notes, partly because I'm trying to share my sources. It's about transparency. I want people to be able to read my novel and then say, oh, I'm going to go do a radio drama which will present a totally different perspective on this. So I don't want, you know, the history to be just sort of muddled up in the fiction. I, of course, while you're reading the fiction, they are muddled up in a way very pleasurably, but I want people to be able to disentangle it and get to my sources and read it themselves.
Oh, I 100% agree with your publisher. I loved reading every minute of those author's notes. I really wanted to understand the history of what it was based on. So that was wonderful. Is this sort of something that you think you might do again? Another historical novel in this way?
Yeah, I would say over the course of my career, about 2/3 of them being historical, and when they are, they're usually factual and to a greater or lesser extent. I think, say, The Wonder was a fictional case, but suggested by about 30 real cases of Baskin girls. So I often seem to start with some little nub of fact. But then contemporary fiction I love too, because you can often be much funnier when there are lots of shared cultural references. You know, if you think of some sitcoms, they can get those quick laughs because we've been in the Starbucks queue, or we've been taking our shoes off to get scanned at the airport. So humor is easier with contemporary fiction.
My last question about the book, a couple of questions about you, and then we'll open it up to the audience soon. But without giving anything away, do you think people were surprised about the ending?
Yes, I do think so. But
I was.
Suspense is a real, it's a funny one. You don't necessarily, suspense is not the only pleasure of novels. So even like some people will deliberately spoil the suspense for themselves by reading an author's note first or glancing at the back of the book. I've met people who, even with just a regular novel, they read the last page first before they buy the book. After other people who go see a film and then buy the book, they know what happens. So you know, the curiosity about what will happen in the main storyline is not always the main motivator, but I think it is one of the pleasures. And I love writing literary fiction that has, you know, big ideas in it, and you're trying to write beautiful sentences, but you're also providing that kind of basic pleasure of what happens next, what happens next. You know, you're like a train, you're keeping people moving forward. And so many people turn to reading as some kind of like break from their own daily life. But I think suspense is one of those things that really helps to thread a book together and to help them reconnect with it, even if, you know, you haven't touched the book in 3 days. So yeah, I absolutely love if literary fiction can include, you know, a bit of time or suspense too.
I'm not, what does this say? Because I need to prove it. What does this say?
such beautiful sentences.
Literally what she just said. Such beautiful sentences.
Ah, come on now, they're not all beautiful.
There are many in the book. There are many beautiful sentences. I picked out 3 that I really loved. One of them was, once you let out a yawn, it starts a family. I love that line. Rain as if the sky is weeping. A minute rubbery arm flips out beside the minute head as if waving. Like, just your writing is so beautiful. The thrill, the fiction, the tension, the thrill, all that's great. But I love your choice of words. Is that one of the elements of your writing that you love dearly, like choosing each word the way you do?
Absolutely, and I think it was very helpful to me that I really wrote nothing but poetry from about age 7 to 19. So poetry is great for making you really focus on the individual words and how they sound as well. It makes you hyper aware of alliteration and assonance and so on. So I think without all those years of poetry, I think I might have just rushed on into storytelling, and I, speak fast, I write fast. So I might have been one of those slightly, dash on and focus on the plot and don't worry too much about the sentences writers. But poetry really makes you notice each word one at a time. But they're not all good, Lord knows. And my first drafts, I'm always embarrassed if I'm on an airplane or something and the person beside me seems to be glancing over, and I want to say to them, my first draft is awful. I put in all the adjectives I might possibly use. It's really just a kind of it's like a cook preparing her ingredients.
I have no doubt that people will dive into the book, those who haven't, those who have. But I do have to ask, because I know the books must be like babies. So I'm going to ask, do you have a favorite? The ones you've written?
I don't know, you like them in different ways. Imagine you have a big family and, one of them made money in business and comes home at Christmas with a car full of gifts. So you're kind of, proud of that child, but perhaps you feel they don't need your protective love quite as much as the unemployed one who lives in your basement. So fond of them all in different ways. I wrote 2 books for younger readers set in Toronto, about a family called the Lotteries. And I have a real fondness for that one because, nobody dies. It's very kind of warm and relaxed vibe compared with much of my extremely dark subject matter in my others.
All right, who would like to hear Emma Donoghue read her book?
Because obviously when I'm traveling, I want books I haven't read, so I don't bring my own. I'm going to read you just one page. To my surprise, one of the point of view characters of the book turned out to be the train, because how the railway companies worked was that one particular driver and one particular stoker worked together, and they had one particular engine they always had, because these 3 needed to know each other, needed to know how the others worked. So it was like kind of a 3-way marriage. So I ended up with the train as one of my perspectives. Okay. Moving at last. She's how the crew refer to the train, out of fondness, but also to mark the distinction between her and them. Technically, she is Engine 721, a 6-wheeled locomotive constructed for the Company of the West 18 years ago. But in another sense, she is this whole train, since without the coal and water in the tender coupled on behind the engine, she couldn't huff and power her wheels. And without the long, thick chain of carriages assembled afresh every night behind her, she would have no reason to move. From the tip of Normandy, she cuts due east like a spoon taking off the tip of the lightly boiled egg of France. Every passenger, whether paying 9 francs to squeeze into one of her 3rd-class carriages, 18 francs for second, or 27 francs for first, will be treated equally to the luxury of speed. Today's trip, 326 kilometers, should be interrupted by only 4 brief stops. Barring acts of God, caprices of nature, mishaps, or human failings, she should pull into Paris Montparnasse in 7 hours and 10 minutes at 3:55 p.m. But why should you take an interest in this particular railway journey? France has one of the densest meshes of tracks on earth. The iron vine writhes across the plains. It bores through the mountains. It leaps the rivers. Every hour of the day, trains shatter the quiet, shower the air, and scare the wildlife. So why care about this one express train from Granville on the morning of the 22nd of October, 1895? Not because she's bound for Paris. Most trains go to or from that knot at the top of the net, the spider at the heart of the web. No, what is remarkable about this train is that she's heading straight for disaster. Every journey must come to an end after all. As the Scottish saying has it, hours are time's arrows, and one of them is fletched with death. Thank you.
Beautiful. My birthday is October 22nd. So I was always So before I turn things over to the audience, I always like to do a little something called rapid fire. I ask you like 15 questions, yes or no, or one answer. Just helps us get to know you just a little bit better before we move it over to the audience. Okay. Here we go. Ready? All right. Dawn or dusk?
Dusk.
Summer or winter?
Autumn.
Salty or sweet?
Sweet.
Glass half full or glass empty?
Glass half full.
Pen and paper or laptop? Laptop. Favorite time of the day to write?
You see, if I were single or if I didn't have a family, I'd be writing at about 10 o'clock at night. But of course, because of me, the three children, it's become more like, 4 or 5 o'clock.
If you could have a conversation with anyone, living or dead, who would it be?
And then Manuel Miranda.
If you could have one superpower, which one would you choose?
Mind reading.
I always say I would fly. That's mine. What is a skill that you wish you had?
Acrobatics.
What do you wish you did more of?
Writing better books.
I think you do that. Desert island favorite dinner.
Fresh fish.
Name a characteristic you value in your friends.
Humor.
What is something that gives you hope?
The youth of today.
That's a good answer. Would you rather be able to fly or teleport?
Fun.
Would you rather be able to speak every language in the world or speak to animals?
Every language in the world.
It's a tough one, eh?
No, I'm picking the humans over the animals, definitely.
Somewhere in the world you have yet to visit but would love to go.
Costa Rica.
What or when is the most relaxing here?
Catching up with my partner at the end of the day.
Something on your bucket list you've yet to do.
Well, let me see.
Go to Costa Rica.
Yes, I guess they're Costa Rican. Yeah.
Are you a good cook?
I'm a regular cook. I cook every day, but no, not a good one.
Who is the funniest person in your circle?
I have a lawyer friend in Toronto. She's extremely funny. Yeah.
Do you make New Year's resolutions?
I used to make about 10 a year, but my fulfillment rate was so low that I began to find the exercise a bit depressing. So not anymore.
And lastly, do you dream?
Yeah, vividly.
Thank you so much. So we are going to open questions up. We've got about 15 minutes to open up to questions from the audience. So keep in mind that we want to try to get in as many as we can. So try to get to your question as quickly as you can once you have the microphone. Danielle, are you going to be walking around with a microphone or?
She's coming.
Yes, here she got a voice out of nowhere. There she comes.
Ooh,
Oh,
I got it.
who has a question for Emma?
Okay, go ahead.
Well, this is a great interview. Thank you very much for both of you. Really super. I just have to ask, where did you come from the world of room? how did you write Room? I was so blown away by that. That whole concept. Thank you for that.
I had two small children, the most everyday experiences. I had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. When I heard about a particular crime case in Austria, the Fritzl case, and I remember thinking, oh, that child would have been delighted to have his mother with him every minute of every day. And for her, that would equally have been a hell. So it was the idea just sort of fell into my life at just the moment when I was sensitized by motherhood to think about the pros and cons of that situation. Yes, I did think, if the child's going to be effectively growing up in a prison, he needs the ideal mother. So I gave her all the things that I know theoretically how to be, but in practice was always too busy writing books to do.
Who has a question for Emma? Oh, right in front of you.
Today I just finished reading Room, and I'm so thrilled about it. So I have two questions. The first, how did you do your research on Room? Because it offers such a deep psychological insight. So did you read any scientific books, psychological books, or did you talk to specialist experts on childhood? And the second question is connected to research again, but for your latest novel. So what was the ratio between research and writing time?
Okay, I'm going to answer them in reverse order. I don't count the research. I don't tot up how long it takes because I do a lot of it, you could say, before writing a novel, but I'm planning the storyline, so really that is part of the writing. And then as soon as I start to write a sentence, I have to go check something. So the research is just like the sea in which the fish of the novel swims. I can't count it. And I find research endlessly fruitful and interesting. It gives me ideas, not just facts. That's why I could never hire somebody else who can do the research for me, because actual plot ideas bubble up from tiny facts, like the fact about the bonus that the crew get. That's not just a background bit of financial information, that's a motivator for the whole plot. And with Room, I followed my 4 or 5-year-old around and wrote down what he said, to get the language right and to get the mindset right. But I also, of course, there are no detailed accounts of what it's like to grow up in a situation like that, because most psychopaths don't want to have to maintain a child. So I read about every analogous situation I could. So I read about, say, children adopted from terrible orphanages who suddenly thrived in a new setting. I read about refugees who just settled in Canada, and that the parents' generation were sort of sitting around shattered and the kids were sort of getting on with learning soccer. I read about all sorts of situations in which children had been, say, hidden away or denied language. So I read every case on a website about so-called feral children. It was just the most heartbreaking research. But I remember my partner used to come home at the end of the day and I'd be there with tears on my eyes and she'd say, why are you putting yourself through this? But the actual writing of the novel was then much less harrowing, because I knew I was going to create a best case scenario for this child, and a childhood which was full of magic, even though we, the adult reader, can tell the parameters are those of a prison. But I tried to give him the ideal mother. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for those questions, ladies, both of you. Thanks so much. Anyone in this side of the room? Oh, right there. Third row.
Hi. I loved Paris Express. I just finished reading it last week. I was very impressed with the research that must have gone into it. So talking about research regarding the workings of the train. And I was just amazed at how much detail there was about the actual train itself and all the research that had to have gone into understanding every facet of the train. I'm not sure what my question is, but
Well, I thank you for pointing that out, because that was quite a challenge to me. I still would have difficulty making a diagram to show you physics of how steam trains work. But I certainly did manage to gather a lot of details on how the men would have spent those hours, on the exposed to the weather and unable to hear each other and are communicating pretty much through sign language. So I really tried to get the actual nitty-gritties of these working men's jobs right, and to give them the kind of dignity that they deserve, and to show how much like thinking and strategizing they had to do to not use up too much coal, and to above all keep everything moving fast enough. So thank you. Yeah, that
So
was
where did that research come from?
yeah, and everything from, you know, Wikipedia articles to you know, videos by elderly Englishmen showing you how they're lovingly restoring a train carriage in their shed, because there were certain things I couldn't work out how they moved them. They clearly weren't, you know, press buttons, but only by watching these videos would I realize that, like, oh, this one is a pull down and this one is a side to side. So those physical gestures, for instance, I could only find in those videos. I also read Zola's novel La Bête Humaine, which for which he traveled around with train crews for weeks. So I got fascinating data borrowed from him. And then I sent off for very, you know, obscure heavy hardbacks with pictures of trains, photographs. And I'd be like, hang on, oh look, there's a little bird cage on top of that carriage, I'll use that. And oh look, there's no standard uniform. So lots of things come from visual sources, very, very handy. And one thing I said that the train was inspired by, that the novel was inspired by a photograph. Lots of photographs were taken of that disaster, but the one I ended up focusing on was one where, you know, almost hidden, almost obscured in the dust on the roof, you see two railway employees standing up there looking down on the disaster. So yeah, visual sources are often underestimated as sources for fiction. They're really almost as useful as the written ones.
Great question as well. Thank you so much for that.
What am I writing right now? I can't tell you, because I'm about to submit a novel, and I always feel it's tempting fate to go, my next novel will be about blah, because what if my publishers don't like it? You know, there are no guarantees, there's no safety net in book writing. People often think that the publishers will just automatically take it. It's not, far from it. So what I can tell you is I'm still working with Blythe Theatre Festival. They've done a musical that I wrote this summer, so I'm going back there for the last show of this run next week. So that's been a peak experience of this year. It's a folk musical based on an Irish couple's letters of the 1840s, to which I added traditional Irish folk songs. So that's been a new genre for me, and I've so enjoyed the experience.
Well, we will look forward to this next novel that's coming out, The Blah. We will wait for it. Another question for Emma? Oh, let me just see if there's anyone else before I come back to you. Anybody else have another question? Then the floor is yours.
Would you if you love a novel idea, but your publisher doesn't like it, what would you do?
Good question. I don't have any novels sitting in my bottom drawer, so I have no novels that all publishers have refused. I have the time to say that my first historical novel, Slammerkin, my two publishers at the time in Britain and America, they dropped it. They didn't want the novels. So suddenly, nobody would publish me. But my agents helped me find other publishers. So that's one solution. I have done some serious rewrites in response to publishers, so I'm open to negotiation. But I try to maximize my power in the situation by always writing the novel first. I don't show them a summary of it in advance, because it would be too easy for them to say, oh, don't like the sound of that one, or why don't you set that one in Italy? I want to give them a novel, and it's too late for them to say, set it in Italy, set it in the 20th century. So yeah, I don't tell them in advance.
I think we have a question over here.
One question about the train. Lately, we have so many train crashes, plane crashes. Do you think the pilots and conductors were speeding because of their bonuses?
Don't answer that.
No, it's funny, this particular train disaster, they did do a full inquiry, but it didn't settle on a final solution. And what I found really interesting was the mixture of perhaps technology going wrong definitely some human error, some human fatigue, for instance. One guard may have nodded off, and that too speaks to the strains of the job. So I got very interested in all the different pressures that an employer could be putting on their employees. Even if there were official rules about things like speed, there can be sort of an implicit hint from employers too. So it became a kind of a fable of capitalism, really.
Well, you have asked wonderful questions. So thank you so much to all of you who spoke up. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Emma's books are for sale, or if you brought it and you'd like her to sign it, she will be here doing that for the next little while now. Oh, microphones. Oh my goodness, you guys are so sweet. Thanks, and my goodness, thank you so much.
It's actually an opera style.
You're amazing. You truly are. Thank you so much. So get your books out. Emma's books are over there to buy, and she looks forward to signing your copies. Thank you, everybody.